Good morning. It was a great show, just want to say. So, I identify as a Wesleyan. I am a Seventh-day Adventist, just so you know. But putting that aside, I just wanted to make a few comments about to challenge your position. Just a thought, something that occurred to me when I was studying Daniel the last few years. I can send you a video that kind of maybe shows it better than I can say it. I'm not at home right now. But so I actually see a detrimental problem with putting the 70th week in the future. And I know people held this view, at least in an undispensational way. I think like Hippolytus maybe was the first, if I recall. But of course, I would point out that historically speaking, they were all over the map on different ideas. They weren't sure if they were in the time of the end, how to parse that out. But yes, I recognize that you're not a dispensationalist, actually. But I think there are problems with your view. And you appealed to some reformers, etc., that appealed to Romans. So there's three things I want to say. So Romans 11, I think a lot of people mistakenly read that as a necessary future event. Now, I'm not saying that's not possible, but if you read carefully, it certainly doesn't demand it. So like Paul says, like, has God forsaken his people? And then he answers the question, no, I'm his people. So it's a present tense reality. And I think we all agree Christ's kingdom is already, but not yet. So I don't think Romans 11 forces, because I do think it's talking about literal Israel, the nation of Israel. But I think that's like an ongoing present reality. If they come back from, if they believe, how much more will it be life from the dead? I don't think that's like a prophecy. It's just a reality that we can make them jealous now, ongoing until Christ comes to join the faith which is theirs, in a sense, right? To the Jew first and then to the Greek. And, I would want to argue strongly, if Jesus isn't the Jewish Messiah, he's nobody's Messiah. The church was established by quote-unquote Jews. So I am not a replacement theologian. I think that term is outrageous. I'm an Adventist. I think we're supposed to be keeping the Sabbath, etc. But it's another story. But here's my main critique of putting the 70th week into the future. Then I'll offer, I think, somebody really smart that, what was his name? I'll think of it in a second, advocates for a view something like this. So you were advocating for a gap between Daniel's 69th and 70th week. I think this can't get off the ground because verse 24 in Daniel 9 states 70 weeks are cut off or determined or allotted for thy people in thy holy city. Now, he lists 6 things, the third of which is to make reconciliation or atonement for iniquity, which obviously, as you're not a dispensationalist and you understand that Jesus' death is what ratified the covenant, the blood of the covenant. So we know that the fulfillment of salvation comes covenantally through the blood of Christ by his death. So 70 weeks are determined, that is, set aside to fulfill these things. One of the most importantly, historically, is Jesus dying for the sins of the world on the cross. So the fulfillment of reconciliation for iniquity, or Kippur, the Day of Atonement sort of language, and the New Testament is clearly demonstrating how he fulfills this by its language coming from the mouth of Jesus, etc. So, not to mention all the problems where if we, what is the temple language in 2 Thessalonians 2? Is that the church, or is it, because if you say we take it literally about the Jews in the future, how literally are you going to go with that? Are you going to say it's a literal temple coming back? And I doubt you do. But, so here's the argument. Jesus' death is the fulfillment of the reconciliation for iniquity. I think you would affirm that. Here's the problem. If we're going to allow a gap, that means the gap isn't part of the 70 weeks of years. As you stated, Jesus dies after the 62. The 7 comes first, ultimately making his death after, and you can't get around it. It's after. It's not at the end of, it's not within, it's after. So he dies after the 62 weeks, which is after the 7. So we have 7, 62, after the 4. And of course, Jesus shows up right at the end of the 69th week, I would argue, from 457 BC, in Artaxerxes' 7th year. So, think about this. His death is what makes reconciliation for iniquity. He dies after the 69th week, because it's after the 7 and then after the 62. So you have Jesus dying sometime after the 69th week. So, if you jettison the 70th week into the future, think about this. That means there's a gap between the end of the 69th week and the beginning of the 70th. We're still in the gap, in fact. Perhaps. Most likely, right? We've been in the gap. But if his death, if the Messiah is cut off after the 69, and it's not within the 70th week, then Jesus dies outside of the 70 weeks. If you put a gap where it's not part of the 70 weeks and he dies after the 69th and the 70th didn't start after the 69th, get what I'm saying? That means his death was in this gap, which means it's not within the 70 weeks, which means he didn't die according to the scriptures, 1 Corinthians 15. In other words, God allots time for his people. And is what brings the new promised new covenant. See Hebrews 8 and quoting Jeremiah 31. So again, I'll just reiterate. If you put Jesus' death in the gap, he doesn't make reconciliation for iniquity in the 70 weeks. He's in the gap. His death is in the gap, making him fail the prophecy. Those things in Daniel 9:24 have to occur in the 70 weeks, which is what the 70 weeks are for. Hopefully that's clear. Let me know. God bless, Lucas. I'm praying for your ministry.